Some crimes are so shocking. Some crimes are so disturbing that even Hollywood's darkest thrillers would struggle to capture their reality. The case of Keith Gentry stands as one of those haunting stories. On the surface, it looked like just another quiet home in a Texas neighborhood, a place where children played outside, families waved good morning to each other, and neighbors felt safe. But behind the walls of that house, a secret horror was brewing, one that would change lives forever. When detectives finally walked through Keith Gentry's door, what they uncovered inside was so twisted, so unimaginable, that the memory of that night would stay with them for the rest of their careers. This is the chilling story of Keith Gentry, the man behind the mask, the neighborhood that never saw it coming, and the crime that shattered the illusion of safety for an entire community. Who was Keith Gentry? To the casual observer, Keith Gentry was unremarkable. He was born and raised in Texas, in a community where reputations mattered and everyone knew each other's names. He lived modestly, working odd jobs here and there. But to those who knew him more personally, cracks were visible beneath the surface. At times, Keith could put on a calm, even friendly mask. But behind closed doors, a darker, festering side of his personality was growing. He was controlling, manipulative, and increasingly unstable. And while outsiders saw a quiet man living in a quiet house, those closest to him lived with a much different reality. The Texas neighborhood that never saw it coming. The backdrop of this story was a suburban Texas neighborhood, the kind of place where families felt safe leaving their doors unlocked at night. Every weekend, families held barbecues, lawns were neatly trimmed, mailboxes freshly painted, and kids rode their bikes down quiet streets. Violence, in the minds of these neighbors, was something that happened in faraway cities. But like so many communities across America, the illusion of safety would be shattered in a single night. Over the years, some neighbors had noticed odd behavior around Keith Gentry's property. Loud arguments, strange noises, a tense energy that seemed to hang in the air. But most brushed it off. People fight, they thought. It's just personal business. And in small communities, people often look the other way rather than get involved. No one could have imagined what was actually happening inside that house. The night that changed everything. It began like any ordinary evening. Families settled into their routines. Children played their last games before bedtime, and the streets slowly grew quiet. But inside Keith Gentry's home, events were spiraling toward disaster. The timeline of that night is still debated. But what's clear is that a confrontation exploded into unspeakable violence. At some point, someone inside the house managed to make a desperate call for help, a call that would bring law enforcement rushing to the scene. When police officers arrived, they immediately sensed something was wrong. The house was dark and quiet, too quiet. The air outside carried an eerie stillness. As officers entered, their flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a scene no one was prepared for. What they discovered inside was nothing short of a nightmare. Inside the house, a horrifying discovery. Detectives and first responders were seasoned professionals. Many had seen violence before, but nothing prepared them for what lay inside Keith Gentry's house. Furniture was overturned, tables and chairs smashed, the walls bore marks of rage, and every room seemed to scream of chaos. But the true horror was in the back rooms. The victims, people who once trusted Keith, people close to him, had been brutally attacked. The cruelty of the violence shocked even hardened investigators. The victims, innocent lives lost. At the heart of this tragedy were the victims, whose lives were stolen in the most brutal way possible. They were not strangers. They were Keith Gentry's own loved ones, family members and people who had once trusted him. Neighbors recalled seeing them outside, exchanging friendly waves at the mailbox, or watching them take walks around the neighborhood. Now, those same neighbors stood in disbelief as news spread of what had happened inside the home. Vigils were held, flowers placed near the property, candles lit in memory of the lives lost. The community was left to wrestle with the question no one could answer. Why would someone destroy the very people closest to them? What darkness could drive a man to commit such an atrocity? The arrest of Keith Gentry. Once the scene was processed, all evidence pointed to one man, Keith Gentry himself. The brutality of the attack, the familiarity with the victims, the evidence scattered throughout the house. It was clear this was no random intruder. This was personal. Within hours, Gentry was located and taken into custody. His arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. To some, it was unthinkable. The quiet man they saw mowing his lawn was now accused of one of the darkest crimes in Texas history. But to others, especially those who had seen his temper and controlling nature, the arrest made chilling sense. The interrogations, searching for answers. When detectives sat Gentry down in the interrogation room, they expected either outright denial or an emotional breakdown. Instead, they got something far more unsettling. Gentry was calm, detached, almost as if he couldn't comprehend the gravity of what had happened. At first, he dodged questions with vague, rehearsed answers. But as investigators pressed harder, his story shifted. Details contradicted themselves. His mask began to slip. Detectives probed deeper, trying to uncover his motive. Was this premeditated? A sudden explosion of rage? But Gentry's responses gave nothing clear. His lack of remorse, his coldness, only made the crime more chilling. The evidence that sealed his fate. Forensic experts played a decisive role in the trial. Blood spatter analysis, fingerprints, and DNA evidence tied Keith Gentry directly to the attacks. It wasn't just the brutality that shocked the jury. It was the methodical way the evidence fit together. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a momentary lapse. It was deliberate. Detectives also testified that Gentry had attempted to manipulate parts of the crime scene, staging certain elements to mislead investigators. But his efforts failed, and instead only reinforced the prosecution's case. The evidence was irrefutable. The verdict and sentencing. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned with its decision. Guilty. Keith Gentry was convicted of murder. The judge handed down a sentence meant to reflect the brutality of his crimes. For the victims' families, it was justice, but also a bitter reminder that no verdict could undo their loss. In emotional victim impact statements, family members described lives stolen, futures destroyed, and wounds that would never heal. Meanwhile, Gentry sat in silence. No apology, no remorse, just the same cold detachment that had defined him from the beginning. The aftermath and legacy. In the years since, the case of Keith Gentry has continued to haunt the community and investigators alike. For detectives, it remains one of the most unforgettable cases of their careers, a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors. For the victims' families, the grief never fades. Anniversaries bring painful reminders of what was lost. The Keith Gentry case is more than just a story of murder. It is a chilling reminder of how darkness can grow unnoticed, even in the most peaceful communities. Lives were lost, families were shattered, and a neighborhood was forever changed. If you want to hear more shocking true crime stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and join us as we uncover the cases that shake us to our core.